Okay, so let's click back to scene 1 on the main timeline, and there's our graphic. Currently, we don't see any of that animation because it's locked inside. And notice that when I click the object, there's this little circle over here. That's the rotation point for any object. Any object, when you click it, you'll see this circle, and it could be at different points. If I were to rotate this, it would rotate from that circle point. And you can move this. We want this for our animation. We want it to be smack dab in the middle. So I'm going to grab the free transform tool and just drag over that circle. And I'm going to press shift just so it kind of locks into that center point. And so now this thing will be rotating from the center. It'll be a little easier to animate when we start animating it on the main timeline. This is a graphic, and graphics are dependent on the timelines that they live on. This is a graphic and it lives on this main timeline. Let's go ahead and label that Pogo. And we're not seeing it move. If we tested this movie, Apple Return, it's just sitting there. Now if this was a movie clip, we would see that animation working. Movie clips are independent of the main timeline, so they work independently, and you would just see that looping. Graphics only work if there's time on this timeline. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to press F5, and as you can see now that graphic is displaying. So if I test the movie again, it's looping. But notice this little break because it's ending those amount of frames and then going back to the beginning. Also notice that we don't see that guide. If we click inside, we see that guide. But since it's a guide later, we don't see it on the main timeline. We don't see it when we test that movie. So if we go back to the completed version for a sec, we'll take a look at this animation. Zoom out a little bit. It starts very small and kind of grayed out or whited out, and then it slowly becomes into focus, and it becomes closer to us. So we're going to create that illusion by just changing its scale. If we click that object at this point and look at our transform palette, you'll find that it's 50% of its original size, and then we're going to tween that up to 350%. Let's take a look at that. Give that a try. Looks like that's 45 frames. So for 45 frames, let's press F5. Zoom out a bit. Let's grab this guy and make him 50%. Now there's this little constraint. It looks like a link here. If that's unlinked, you'll have to set both the width and the height. If it's linked, then you can just set one and it'll proportionally change the other one. So I'm just going to press 50, press return. At this point I'm going to make sure that that's centered to the stage, so I'm going to go to the align palette, click the to stage, make sure that's on, and then click center, and then I'll make sure it's dead center in the stage. So at this point it's 50%. Let's tween it up to that 350%. So I'm going to right click or control click and say create motion tween. If you're a main menu person, you can say insert motion tween. So let's go to frame 45, click our object again, go back to the transform palette and press 350%. So we can see that that's tweening a bit. So let's test that. Okay, looks pretty good. You may notice that it looks a little odd, especially kind of when it gets ready to jump up. If we go back to the animation inside this one, so if we go back into this graphic, we'll notice that there is a slight pause. It pauses to push down. So if you were thinking about it, the pogo stick wouldn't move when it's pushing down. It would only be pushing forward on the up part of it. So we're going to work out that part next. So we're going to go back to the main timeline, and we're just going to reset this tween so we can do a better job. I'm going to right click and say remove tween. Then I'm going to right click again and say create tween. So it got rid of that keyframe at the end, so we can start fresh and new. And there our little guy is. So let's zoom in here. I'm going to zoom into this guy so I can see him. And then let's talk about the motion editor real quick. It's going to allow us to do a more refined job, a more precise job with this animation. So I'm going to click that object, or click the tween up here and click that motion editor tab. If you don't see it, you can go up to Window and find motion editor. It should pop up somewhere, and you can drag it and put it wherever you like. I'm going to need to see more of it, so I'm going to click over here at the top of that window and just drag down so I can see as much as possible. And I got to click back on that object to get that back. And you can see it's divided into categories. So these are all the properties that you can change. So you can change the XY location, how it's rotated, how it's skewed or scaled. If you've got a color effect on it, you can have access to all of those individual properties and tween those individual properties separated. And it keeps track of it. So anytime if you did it on the main timeline, like we've done before, it still keeps track of it in this editor. You can go back and make changes. We're going to use this to complete that part of the animation. Okay, I want to see more frames as well, so I'm going to go up to the motion editor and just drag to the right. It's going to increase the amount of frames that I need to see. And you can also change the height of individual windows. This is a selected window, or you can change the height of all the windows. Now we're going to be tweening the scale of it. We want it to scale up in 100% increments till it gets about 350% big. But we want it to wait for 5 frames. The first bit is that wait. So we're going to toggle our playhead to frame 5, and then right here we can create a new keyframe, and I'm going to go ahead and click that. And since the scale X and Y are linked, it put 2 keyframes on there. If that was toggled off, you'd have to do them for both. I recommend you just keep that on for now. So it's going to remain 50% for those 5 frames. The next bit is to get it to scale up for 100%. So that happens, if we clicked on the inside, we'd see that that happens over 10 frames. We want to add 10 to 5, which is 15. And so for these 10 frames, we want that to grow 150%, or 100%, I mean. I'm going to click Add Keyframe, and then I'm going to click over here and press 150. 50 plus 100 is 150. Let's make that smaller again, just so we can see our animation happening. Alright, so I gotta click the object to see that. So it's waiting, and then it's waiting to squash down, and then at the point when it jumps up, it moves. So we want that to wait another 5 frames, so we'll go to 20 here. 5 plus 15 is 20. And so we just don't want any change, so 150, 150, and then we want to go up another 10 frames. Press the make keyframe, and then change that to 250. 35. Stay the same. And then 45. 350. Alright, so let's click back to the timeline. You can see that it's marked all those keyframes for us on the timeline, and let's just take a look at it. So now it looks like it's hopping. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it gives a more realistic look. And once you master those tools, you certainly can do some pretty awesome things. So if we go back to the very beginning, if we go back to the first one here, let's take a look at that and review that again. So this is moving up, and notice that it is kind of white, and then it kind of gets clearer as it moves along. So we're going to tween a tint on top of that to create that effect. So back to 1 here. I'm going to click that guy, and I'm going to go to Properties and choose Tint under Color Effect. Sometimes these are hidden, So you might have to scroll or make a box smaller to see that. And then I'm going to tint that up to 80% white. So choose white up here and then make that 80% or close to it. And then we'll just move our playhead to the end, and at that point we want that tint to be 0%. So we're changing that over time. As you can see, it starts to fade in.